Hello, and welcome to a very special 8-minute demo video series. Today, we're going through a video tutorial on OIS 6.3 Advanced Workflow Design and Best Practice Video Shorts. Yep, these are going to be smaller videos on specific topics. And the topic we're going to talk about right now is global settings, meaning variables, counters, and schedules. Let's take a deeper dive into global settings. Now, everyone knows we have global settings for counters, variables, and schedules. You may not know exactly how to use them, or you may have used them or maybe dabbled and didn't want to worry about it. But this video will show you just some recommendations on the counters, variables, and schedules. Let's take a look. We'll start with variables because that's what most people use right off the bat. And there's a couple ground rules for variables. First of which, they're not variable. They're constants. Poorly named, but you can change them over time, but you cannot change them on the fly as a built-in mechanism within Opalis, and that gets some people frustrated. So I'm going to create a new variable, and I'm going to logically relate it to my global settings folder that I have here by the path, the folder path. So first, I want to go to variables, and then 8-minute demo, and I'm going to create a new folder, and then one more new folder. This naming convention, which we do talk about in this best practice, is what I recommend because settings are global. Any policy can see any of these and use them. So if you break them up logically, it makes more sense and it's easier to find. You also can lock them down by folder with the permissioning that we talk about in these best practices as well. So now that I have a logical folder structure that matches 8-minute demo, 8-minute demo, best practice video shorts, best practice video shorts, global settings, global settings, now I can create either other folders or variables. So I'm going to create a new variable. This is going to be my text. And I'm going to put in here hello world. Finish. And now I can go use that text variable over in my policy. And it is as simple as put your send platform event out here or any other object and right-clicking, subscribe to variable as opposed to publish data, and then navigate to your variable. And there it is. Now if we do a test, we'll be able to see it in two places. First off, down here in my variables section in the resource browser. Second, if we run it, it will show up as the summary as we've described. So if we do step over, you could also see it in the runtime/design time properties. All right, that's the most basic form of a variable there is, but there are others, so let's try them out. New variable, and we're going to call this current time, and this is simply now. And for this is really, there's only a couple special variables, and this is one of them. So if we go back to our global settings, we'll modify this one and we'll say now equals, we're just concatenating there, and variable, and we want to navigate to our variable and finish. And now we'll do testing console again, and we'll do step over. As you can see, the my text turned into hello world, and the current time turned into the current time stamp. Now, this current time, or the now variable, is excellent use case for the format date timestamp because you can put it in here, and then we can change the format up to be what we want. So we'll just connect these up, and instead of the variable, well, I'll put the changed in here, format result, and okay, step over, next, and then you can see here, based on the changes that I made or requested for the format, we get the format changed there. Alrighty. So there's one more special category of variables, and that would be environment variables. So we will create a new variable, and this will be program files, and then we put the environment variable for program files in here. And I'm just going to paste that in there. Hit finish. We'll go to our policy. We'll modify this object and do subscribe to variable, program files, and then put a slash after that. I assume it needs one. All right, we'll step over. Next. And you can see here, see program files x86, and that's where it was for the environment variable. It has been translated. We could take a look. I added that slash, but obviously you'll have to play around with that. So we could even change it up. And one of the whole reasons to do this is because I could check this guy in, and if I wanted to say I wanted to change something on the fly, as opposed to just having program files, I could even say common program files and modify the data here to common program files. Finish. And now, without changing anything in the workflow, in fact, it picked up the change that with the common. So we'll just hit here. There we are. And then there's the common file. So that's the main feature of variables, is I can go in and change my text from this is new and run this policy again. And the next platform event, there we go, this is new. I didn't have to check out the policy. These are commonly used for server names, for things that won't change very much, but if they do, you can have them referenced and changed all at once. So just keep these things in mind. Now, a lot of people say, can I store passwords in here? Well, you certainly can, because I can create a new variable and call it, password, and the value of the password will be this is super secret. But as you can see, it's plain text there. But if we had an object that takes passwords, like a run program object, and go into security credentials, you can use the variable password, and it will get translated as needed. So in the policy, it's masked here, but obviously when you went to choose it, if you scrolled over, it's plain text, and it is plain text in the database. Now you can lock all this stuff down. You can lock the policies down. You can lock the folders down as far as permissions. Just remember back to the securing policies demonstration. But this may or may be an option for you, and this is just how it is in OIS 6.3. But that is a common question. So the things to keep in mind about variables are passwords can be stored and reused over and over again, but they are stored plain text in the database, even though you can lock things down. Variables that take in text or server names or distribution lists for mailing, that's a common usage. And then there's some special ones like now or the environment variables that you can take advantage of. Now we're going to move on to counters. So counters are very much like variables, except you can change them. The only restriction is they're integer values. So unless you speak integer, it may not be as nice as the variables are for you to use. But counters are usually used as semaphores, gating mechanisms, in other words, or something to count up or count down. So let's dig into that. Now I need to create my folder structure. Alright, now I can create a counter, and I'm just going to call it my counter. And you can give it a default value of whatever you'd like. I'm going to leave it at 0. If we go into global settings, I'm going to get rid of the run program. We'll just add on to this. We'll go into the utilities category, and we'll do a get counter value, just so you can see that that default value holds true. Now this is just getting the counter value, so I'm going to counter value equals, and next it's going to get the counter value, and then obviously counter value is 0. Now if you look over here in the resource browser, you can already see the counter value is 0 there. Now let's do an update to that counter value. So we're going to do modify counter value. Now you could put the modify after the get counter value, but the modify does get it once you've set it. So we're just going to replace it. Identify the counter, and then what action we want to take: increment, decrement, set, or reset. In this, we're just going to set it to 99, so it's something different. We have to reassociate the link like that. And now we can run it through the test console again. Step over, next. We're going to set it to 99. Currently it is 0. Next, and then you can see it's 99. Now you saw that this did not change. That's because in the testing console, counters aren't incremented, set, or anything. You can get them, but they will not actually set in the database for that instance. So keep that in mind. And then there's other counter objects. You can monitor for counters, you can modify counters, and you can get counters, essentially. And why would you want to monitor for a counter? Well, let's say you are incrementing a counter based on the number of completed workflows, and once it reaches 10, then you want to continue. So you could have a separate workflow that has a monitor counter for the value of 10, and then if that monitor counter reaches 10, then it can initiate another workflow or initiate tasks in that workflow, whatever you need to do. So counters are very useful for that sort of gating mechanism, and they can be set on the fly by other objects. Well, let's do a common use case for these. So I'm actually going to create a new policy, and I'm going to be reading a file, and I'm going to set a counter value. So I could do this one of two ways. The first way, I'll do it, and we're going to grab the computers that has quite a few things in there. ASCII 1-end, and then we can simply the counter and say action increment 1, period, and it'll just increment it every time. So if we check this in, press start, and it's going to read those lines and modify that counter. So if we actually look at the log history, we're going to see that modify counter was executed the number of lines that were in that file, which was expected. Now if we change this back to get counter value, identify the counter, finish, reassociate, save a link, and run this through. We'll see that it's at 27, and if we check that file, I bet it would be 27. Yep, lines 27. So that's what we expected. Alright, so that's one way to modify a counter value. The other way is, so let's say we wanted to set it to whatever the line count was. So in order to do that, we're going to have to use a different object from the text file management, which is get lines. Get rid of this read line. I'm going to grab that file, computers, add just this is all 1-end, finish, and then in here we're going to set it to total number of lines. So with the getLines object, we're able to query essentially for the data within a file, and then we're going to set that total number here. Let's actually give that some different data. We'll just add a line so that we can see a different value. So we've changed the value. We're going to go ahead and run the modify counter again with the set, and then we're going to run this guy, refresh here, and we're at 28. So you can see how that would work for cataloging things. And if you're interested in more usage of the counter values, make sure you get a look at the looping section of this best practice, because counters are often used in loops, and that is covered in that section. One thing to note about counters, though, they are universal just like the variables, so they're not policy specific. That's why you logically locate them in a folder structure. The other thing to note is you don't want two different policies updating a specific counter, because unless you are planning to use it that way, maybe you want to make sure that two policies are actually counting up. You can do that as long as they don't step on each other. And in fact, if that's the case, if they're stepping on each other as far as updating at the same exact millisecond, you can put the get counter value in its own policy and trigger it so it'll queue as necessary. But the point is, it's not common to have two or more policies accessing and using the same counter value unless one's writing and one's reading, because They are universal and they will be updated, so be sure to be aware of what's going on with your counters, just like you were with your links and whatnot. So the next subject we're going to talk about are schedules. So once again, we're going to need to create that folder structure. And then for schedules, pretty easy. We're going to do a new schedule. We're going to call this weekdays. Go to details, and then it's as easy as unchecking the boxes that you don't want. If you wanted to get more fancy with the occurrence, you can. If you wanted to narrow down the hours, it's as simple as doing denied and permitted. I'm not going to mess with that, but you certainly feel free to do that. So weekdays, and if you have any exceptions, you do have to log them individually. So if there's a weekday that you want to not include in the schedule, like the 22nd, disallow, okay. Or likewise, if there's a weekend that you want to consider for this schedule, you could do that. So it handles the exceptions individually, but you can check what you want and choose your hours. Once you hit finish on that, it becomes a schedule in the folder, in the global. It's global like everything else in the global settings. And now you have a couple options. First, you can set this policy at the properties level to adhere to that schedule. Which means if, let's say, there was a monitor attached to this, like monitor date time, and it's going to run every 60 seconds or execute every 60 seconds, and we check this in and run it, you can see that it's running. And it will execute as needed during those times. Now let's simulate what it looks like outside of that. So I'll put a deny exception for today, the 14th. Go up here. We'll start that. And because there's a deny exception, it's not going to start here. It'll stay published, but it will not initiate until midnight and 1 second tomorrow. So keep that in mind. They'll be running like this, but it will not be taking up a resource. And then once it satisfies the schedule, it will kick off. Now the other option is to use a check schedule object. And if we add this guy in here, because he's not a mod or anything, he's just a decision maker. We choose the schedule we want. And then we can make decisions based on the links. So conforms to schedule equals true. We will go down this path. Let's change that link. And then we can copy this guy, paste, change this to false. And if we run this through the test console, we'll be able to see the decision because we have the deny for today. Alright, so if we step over, next, counter value, it's going to check the schedule. It's a deny, so it did go down the not on schedule route that I created, so you can see how that works. And that's basically it with schedules. Now there is a trick. If you've assigned this policy a schedule, you want to change it or remove that schedule, it's as simple as choosing the ellipsis, then hitting OK by not choosing any schedule, and then it's blanked out, finish, and if we check this in, you'll see that it starts right up because there's no schedule associated to it. So that's it for variables, counters, and schedules. Let me review some of the topics on the scheduling since I did that for counters and variables. Scheduling is universal, so any schedule you create can be used by anything, so keep them logically grouped by folder names that associate with the folders for your workflows. They cannot be set on the fly by objects. It's not like a counter. They can be applied to policies, as you saw. They can be tested within policies, as you saw with the check schedule. You have to create them and edit them manually. There is no bulk loading of schedules or calendar concept or anything like that. No fine resolution for these, so they only go down to the hour. You can monitor for something every 60 or 15 seconds or 5 seconds, but if you want to say, I want to deny this schedule for 30 minutes, you can't do that because the schedule only goes down to an hour for that. And of course, just like all the other global settings, they have permissioning. All right, I think that's everything as far as the counters, variables, and schedules go. So that's your introduction to global settings. Of course, we'll be using these throughout the rest of the demonstrations and the best practices and all the other posts on my blog. We certainly appreciate you watching. Thank you.